Okay, this is the fifth video journal, or the third video journal in the fifth reflection. And based off one of the recent discussions we had after a student taught presentation, I just kind of want to spitball what from someone that doesn't know much about education. I don't know, from a legislative point of view, just sort of spitball numbers and maybe different solutions that could happen in terms of funding for education in the United States. So I guess the question I want to answer is, how can we improve schooling and public schools in the United States? I don't know much about the current state of inner city schools, but it seems like the general perception is that that's a problem. Low income areas having students in schools is they usually lack funding, due to the taxpayers in their area, and also, funding has dropped dramatically for school districts all across the United States, not only in these inner cities, but also one of the teaching assistants mentioned, money has dropped for school districts across Indiana itself, not only in these low income areas. So the question is, how can we improve public schools? And I wanted to look at the numbers of government spending. Let's pull this up. Government spending. So in 2015, this in a spending graph, the U.S. government spent over $1.1 trillion, with 72 billion going towards education, which only makes up 6% of the pie graph, which seems like a significant amount, but clearly based on what's happening in our country, it's not enough to push kids towards higher education. And based purely on reactions from even parents in our class, there's some problems with there's problems with the public school systems at their most basic level, which throwing money at it isn't necessarily the correct answer, but I think it's a way to start flipping the system on its head and initiating change. So the first big number that I wanted to look at was the military spending from the U.S. government, which is at basically $600 billion, which is 54% of our country's budget for spending, which is a ridiculous number, $600 billion, which is just absolutely crazy, just thinking about how much money is in that, and that our government spends over half of its resources on simply, building missiles, funding the army, and different things like that. It's another subject I don't know too much about, but just looking at the numbers, we have $600 billion being dumped into the U.S. Army. And then we look at the other hand of it, as mentioned before, and we only have 72 billion being poured into our education system, which is, obviously creating the basis of the citizens and the communities in our country. So I think from that number alone, we can see that there's a massive disservice happening to the people of our country, that we don't have a significant amount of federal funding being used in our country, being poured into our education system to produce better citizens and a smarter population base. An interesting thing we talked about in my microeconomics class, actually, which is a sort of a connection out of left field, is positive externalities that can occur in the economy, and one of them was education. That, for each person that's educated, there are positive effects to everyone around them because of that education. Julie, who maybe wouldn't have funding in her school, has more funding and can receive scholarship money to maybe become a doctor, becomes a great doctor, an opportunity that wasn't there before, and then is able to positively affect a huge group of people that are pouring in and out of the hospital or place or pediatrician place she works at. So those positive externalities are often things that aren't considered when people are looking at different things. It's sort of an intangible aspect that can't be measured by a number, but it's definitely something that occurs when someone is educated properly. So just some sort of, pulling a number out of nowhere, let's cut military spending by $100 billion, maybe not make so many missiles, and dump $100 billion into the education system, doubling what the yearly spending is, and see what we can do. I guess my idea for this is using that money to fund an experiment in our country to see if it would work. This is just a completely sort of crazy idea that I've thought up of in the past couple of days, but maybe taking that increase of funding to some degree and applying it to a big city type school district over the course of 10 years and sort of performing an experiment to see if students can grow with that increased funding. And with that funding, there would be more money poured into the facilities, the facilities, especially with, especially better technology in this day and age. So computers, tablets, similar to the Future Center that we have in Shortridge, but applying that to an entire school district where students can use that to make better applications and improve the extra money could go towards paying teachers at an increased rate in those situations to see if they could, obviously this would happen, draw in better teachers and also just improve the teacher base coming from students from college. I know a big thing with one of my favorite high school teachers was how little he was getting paid. He spent 12 to 14 years at my high school, and he was still getting paid, I think $40,000 or $50,000 a year, which is, such a low margin for someone that is, creating the future people of the population. But I think one of the crucial things in improving our education system is finding better teachers and creating better educators from and essentially just making it a more attractive job. I think that's something that many people have called for. Just an increase of pay could really change the face of education in these public schools. So that's the main area where that money would be allocated, and just see how this experiment turns out over the course of maybe 10 years, and then make a judgment based on that. I think it's sort of a long-term solution, but it's something but it's better than what's currently in place, because we would at least have some sort of conclusion from the experiment. Right now, we have no change necessarily happening in no major changes happening at the federal level for our public schools. And so I think having some sort of experiment and getting tangible results from that experiment would be very helpful in improving our country and improving the education system in the process. And then another thing, just a small tidbit, is that my high school was smaller than the average high school. I graduated with a class of 80 people, So I think it would be beneficial to, in that school system, breaking down the student base into smaller schools where they could, have smaller class sizes with those improved teachers. So I think that would be really crucial in the development of this experiment. In conclusion, this is just me thinking about a problem and trying to come up with a easy, quick fix solution. I don't think it's nearly close to what could happen, but I think it could be an interesting perspective from someone who's, not an education major. Not that that really matters, but just sort of an outside perspective from someone who, isn't heavily involved in the public schools education process. So, I hope it's some sort of creative idea. I'm sure many people can point at a graph and say, use this money here, but I think it's interesting to talk and continue to discuss. Thank you.